did establish Fort Yuma in 1851, across from what was then known as Arizona City. Arizona City is now known as Yuma. Initially supplying Fort Yuma, they used an overland route which had been mapped out by Kit Carson in 1846. This was costing the Army $500 a ton to have supplies shipped in. And of course, very interested in cutting these costs, the Army set up a contract to anyone who had come out and established themselves as a water carrier. And in 1852, a man named James Turnbull purchases a 65-foot side-wheeler tug in San Francisco. This vessel, named the Uncle Sam, is powered by a 25-horsepower steam-powered engine capable of carrying about 20 tons of cargo. This vessel had to be disassembled into sections, loaded onto some schooners, and shipped out. Arriving at the mouth, was offloaded, reassembled, then went to work offloading the schooners which had delivered it. Those schooners also laden with supplies to Fort Yuma. Turnbull was successful in delivering goods upriver 150 miles to Fort Yuma. Problem for Turnbull and the Army was that it had taken him 15 days to do so on his first voyage, and the schooners at the mouth were still heavily loaded with supplies. He was able to completely offload his vessels, but it had taken him 8.5 months to do so. He left the area to secure a larger, more powerful steam-powered engine. While re-outfitting the Uncle Sam, it was accidentally sunk. He left the area yet again to secure another vessel, but somewhere along the way must have had second thoughts, as he never did return. The Army went back to using the overland route, till a short time after, when a man named George Alonzo Johnson, who had been operating a ferry system there at Fort Yuma, chose to purchase a new vessel. This vessel was a 104-foot side-wheeler powered by a 50-horsepower steam-powered engine, capable of carrying about 30 tons of cargo. Johnson chose to rename his vessel the General Jessup. We're pretty sure his name choice there was no mistake. As it turns out, the name of the man in the Army who would have final say over who is going to be awarded the contract to supply Fort Yuma, of course, also named General Jessup. An immediate success, we're told mainly due to the fact that he had hired Cocopah and Chechen Indians who lived along the river to have firewood out on the shores for him about every 30 miles, the average day steaming for the General Jessup. Soon unable to keep up with the amount of freight being delivered on the river, he had another vessel built named the Colorado. The Colorado was a 120-foot stern-wheeler powered by an 80-horsepower steam-powered engine, capable of carrying 60 to 70 tons of cargo. That vessel was noted in a local newspaper at Fort Yuma as fast as a bolt of lightning, able to make the 150-mile trip from the river mouth to Fort Yuma in only 2 to 3 days. Now Johnson wanted to explore the upper Colorado River. At that time, everything upriver from Fort Yuma was considered the upper Colorado. He approached Congress in an effort to allocate funding for that expedition. Congress, agreeing with Johnson, realizing the need to know how to someday navigate the upper river, did appropriate some $70,000 to fund that expedition, but awarded the funds instead to a man named Joseph Christmas Ives. Ives was a lieutenant in the Army's Topographical Corps of Engineers, had been out a couple of years earlier, part of an overland expedition led by Lieutenant Whipple. Johnson offered the chartered service of one of his 2 vessels to Ives. Ives declined, believing he would be able to have his own vessel built much cheaper than the charter rate would be, and did have a 54-foot steel-hulled stern-wheeler built in Philadelphia. This vessel, named the Explorer, was assembled completely, tested on a lake up there, then disassembled into sections and shipped out. Now Johnson, still wishing to be the first man to explore the Upper Colorado, does set out the same day that the Army's expedition would be able to begin, December 31st, 1857, but was able to start out from Fort Yuma. The Army's expedition was forced to start at the mouth. Ives and his crew arrived at Fort Yuma days later. They're happy to tell everyone at Fort Yuma that they were going to be the first men to explore the Upper Colorado. People of Fort Yuma had known Johnson for years. They were just as happy to tell them that Johnson was already on his way upriver and had a several-day head start. Ives, a little upset to hear this news, orders his crew to take on supplies as quick as they could, set out from Fort Yuma, and proceeded to run aground well in sight of the fort. Spent the next day and a half getting themselves off that sandbar and continued on in pursuit of Johnson. This is not the last grounding for the explorer by any means. The captain soon realized that whenever there's a group of Indians along the riverbank, there was sure to be shallow water ahead. Apparently, the Indian tribes in this area found it hilarious watching these paddle wheelers run aground and watch as the crew works to get those vessels off. Johnson was able to make it some 450 miles upriver before beginning his descent. As he did, he soon encountered a man named Lieutenant Edward Beale. Lieutenant Beale, the leader of the Army's Camel Corps, had been sent out mapping out wagon routes and railroads to the west. As they had first encountered the river, had been able to ford the river, and all the camels and soldiers had made it across safely. They did lose a couple of horses and a number of burro on that first crossing, though. Encountering the river again on the return leg of their journey, they find that they are now unable to coax the camels back into the river. Apparently, one crossing of the Colorado was enough for these animals. So Beale is basically stranded on the shore of the Colorado when Johnson happens by in the General Jessup. Both men a little surprised to see each other there, but Johnson was able to help him out by ferrying all the camel, soldiers, and remaining stock across the river. Beale continued on. His maps were so well laid out that eventually Route 66 traveled through and nearly used the exact same path. Both Johnson and Ives again meeting each other, the two men began exchanging notes. Johnson now offers the services of his first mate to Ives. Ives takes him aboard, continues on, and eventually does run hard aground, just past the point that Johnson had said should be the year-round head of operations for paddle wheelers, and in that grounding the boiler was knocked loose from its mounts on the Explorer. Ives leaves most of the crew there to make repairs, continued on with a few men in a small steam launch, apparently unable to make it much further in that vessel, continued on a little further on foot, and declared he made it some 500 miles upriver before returning. Now, Ives leaves the steel-hulled vessel, the Explorer, there at Fort Yuma, continued on eastward again, mapping out wagon routes and railroads to the west. It was 1 year during the spring runoff, the Explorer was swept away from its moorings at Fort Yuma. It was then thought to be lost on the river, possibly even swept on out to sea. No one really knew for sure. But over the years, what's left of that vessel has been rediscovered and currently rests some 23 miles south of the U.S.-Mexican border, but some 14 miles away from the current river channel. Just another illustration of how drastic some of the flood flows on the Colorado used to run. Johnson was able to get the freight rate down for the Army to about $75 a ton. So naturally, when they opened up Fort Mojave, a little further north from where we are now, he was also awarded the contract to supply it as well.